Welcome to the Citizens Live conversation with Dia Carabajal, Democratic candidate for State Assembly in the 126th District. Just to give you an overview, that includes the city of Auburn and several Cuba County towns. So Dia, thanks so much for joining us again.
Well, thank you for having me, Robert. It's always a pleasure. These Facebook Live events are wonderful, keeping people informed when we can't be together. And I've watched several of them. I've been in a couple of them. So I appreciate your efforts and the efforts of the citizen to keep our electorate informed and to keep people talking and aware of what's going on in the 126th district. So thank you very much.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's part of, with this time. And I think it's a good opportunity to talk to the candidates, get updates from them, and gives people an easy platform to hear from the candidates too. So we'll keep it going right on through November. So, so what's the latest from you? And obviously there's a lot going on in the world, in terms of, I guess, an update on where your campaign stands. Where do things go now that we're past the primary? And it looks like, anyway, we have to wait for the final results, of course, but it looks like John Lamondes will be your opponent on the Republican side.
Well, right. So we don't know 100% for sure who's on the other side yet. So we're still waiting and we're watching. I don't know that it will change. I don't know if it'll change what we're doing terribly much, whether it's going to be two candidates on the other side or one candidate. We're going to still go out, or as much as we can. We're going to get our word out to voters in the 126th. We're going to continue to talk to people about the issues that are out there that are important to them, because that will continue to shape the conversation. Part of this whole election process is being but being able to, through the petitioning process, we go out and we meet people and we talk to people. We find out what their concerns are, and that shapes the conversation that will be had, and also the understanding of what the issues are that are pressing in the 126th. Through one person's filter, it is hard to express those issues. But as you talk to people, you get everybody's filter, you get everybody's point of view. So it starts to focus a campaign on what the issues are. And the 126 is so vast that there aren't necessarily the same issues in southern Cayuga County that there are in rural Cortland County or in Camillus. So getting out there, listening to people, meeting them, talking to them the best that we can under these circumstances, a lot of Zooming, a lot of phone calls. And hopefully as the summer progresses, we'll be able to get out to some socially distancing events and maybe meet people face to face, but 6 feet apart. And so that's what we're concentrating on. It's not my first election cycle, so there is a rhythm that these campaigns begin to pick up. And usually right around 4th of July, after 4th of July is when things start to rock and roll, when you really start to get busy. That's not to say that I'm not busy. I go for my walk at 7 in the morning on beautiful Emerson Park, and then at 8 o'clock, I'm in my kitchen chair and I'm busy on the phone and on the computer, emails and things, right up until 8 o'clock at night. So things are busy, even though we can't knock on doors and we can't go to, the normal functions. House parties are a normal function of campaigns or backyard barbecues, or even bigger events throughout the summer. We can't do that, but we're still, still connecting, still Zooming, still pressing on, and it has a different feel, but it is still the same kind of energy that's beginning to build now that the July 4th weekend is over and at the end of June. It feels similar.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. An issue I wanted to start with that we talked about last time, so really it's a continuation of that. It deals with education, because this is obviously I think even more pressing now, given the fact that we see the impact of COVID-19 and the fact that not just school districts, but local governments too, are going to see less aid because the state's withholding some of that aid due to the budget crunch they're facing. So, in terms of addressing that from the state level, I guess, what do you think the state legislature's role has to be in making sure that the school districts have the resources they need to educate the children?
Well, so as a representative, you advocate for your region, for the New York State, for the 126. So the role is to make sure that in this process that this area is not forgotten, right? It's easy to miss a region when you are underrepresented, which we are underrepresented right now in this part of New York State, because we don't have a 50th Senate, we don't have a 50th district senator. And so that puts us at a disadvantage. So the role is to make sure that when that funding comes back to the district, whether it's education funding or healthcare funding, that is to make sure that you're not lost in the mix. And it's easy for a small, I want to say small because the 126 does have the population that is equal to the other districts, but it's easy to get lost, especially when you don't have representation in part of your district. So that role in bringing funding back, we're still waiting to hear from what's going on with the federal government. The sad part about it is that the rest of the country seems to be on an upward trajectory for the COVID-19 epidemic, unfortunately, pandemic. And so they're going to have needs in other states. So I think the clamor in Washington is going to be a little louder for Washington to come up with more federal aid for states that are affected by COVID-19 to support the expenses that this pandemic is costing. So the sad part is that the trajectory is moving up, but with the additional attention that those other states will bring and the needs that they unfortunately will have, we know what those needs are, will force Washington to take a look again at more aid, and that will help the decisions not be as hard here in New York State. So those are things that I'm thinking about and things that I'm watching for in the bigger picture of government, right? Because the federal aid comes to the state, and then the state goes ahead and equitably distributes it to municipalities, to school districts, to the different counties. So that's what we're looking for, is the role that representation will take under these circumstances. And certainly representation in the majority also amplifies the voice of a region. So we have had representation in the minority for a very long time, in the minority caucus, and that does affect the abilities to receive some of that money back. That's the unfortunate side of what is Albany. So we've had, and that includes the 50th Senate district as well. We have Republican representation there for a very long time.
To kind of follow up on that, you have been in local government, and there was just a story within the last couple of weeks that in terms of that aid to municipalities, that the city of Auburn, about $1 million will be withheld. Having been on the city council, I think you can speak to just how big of an impact that would have, and the need for that federal funding that a lot of leaders, Democrat, Republican, across the state are talking about. How does that kind of loss really hurt a local municipality like Auburn?
It's incredible, right? That is not a small amount for us. That's huge. And the burden goes back to the individual taxpayers within the city of Auburn or within the Auburn School District when those funds are cut. Services end up being cut and first responders end up being cut. Those are huge issues for a place like the city of Auburn or for Cayuga County or for the school districts. These are large amounts of money. So understanding how those types of cuts will affect school districts and municipalities is real important. I don't come without a huge amount of experience in governance. So my experience on the school board makes me understand not only how advocacy works, but also how the funding comes from Albany. And the same with the city. I understand where things are moving, the moving parts of the finances of the city of Auburn and how it affects our individual programs, our taxpayers, our tax levies. So those things directly impact the people of Auburn. It's hard to see that connection if you haven't been involved in a school board budget or you haven't been involved in a city budget, where all of those moving parts are and how the different federal aids and state aids affect those projects. So, and again, it all comes down to the federal government does give us grants, but mostly it's indirectly because they give that aid to New York State and then New York State distributes that aid. And that's why if the federal government doesn't help cities and municipalities, cities, counties in their next aid package, that's why it will affect us. That's how it will affect us so deeply. And they're New York State tax dollars. When I say federal aid, that's federal money coming back to New York State that New Yorkers, Auburnians, Cayuga County residents, Portland County residents have put into tax dollars into the federal pocketbook, if you will. So it's not aid. I guess that's not even the right word to use, but it's tax dollars being redistributed back to us so that we can get a leg up under these circumstances in these crisis circumstances. So understanding how that all flows and how that all works is a great advantage, actually, moving into the next step of governance. That was your question, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
How does that all work? How all of these moving parts work together is important to understand. It's quite a learning curve if you haven't come up with through the ranks. That makes sense. So my resume goes, I repeat it over and over again, twice elected to the city school board and I had a leadership role on the school board. I was vice president and then moving into city council and being involved in city council. So that those experiences inform what will become advocacy for the 126th. So yeah, it's important, and it's really important in a crisis situation.
What do you see your role as if you're elected to the state legislature in addressing systemic racism? We've heard a lot about this topic really over many years, but especially given recent events and over the last well over a month or so now, we've really heard many calls for action on this front, not just words, but action. So in terms of being a legislator, how would you approach that and really focus on addressing this once and for all?
So one of the problems that happens is that the legislature will just give edicts. We know them as unfunded mandates. And this particular situation is in danger of having a lot of unfunded mandates. When you start turning around and putting the burden on the local municipality, the local police department, Governor Cuomo called out mayors today to, not on racism, but called out mayors to enforce COVID-19 rules today. And he is called out on local mayors and local governing groups to deal with racism with their police departments, with their sheriff's departments. So what happens is that they say, here you go, here's the law, and then they don't provide it with any teeth. And what I mean by that is they don't give the money for retraining, they don't give money for hiring. Part of the process with police reform right now is the ability to have training, the ability to hire people of color. Those things have to be put in place in order to have an effect, in order to help municipalities to get through those challenges that systemic racism bring. So yes, the criminal justice system is a place where systemic racism exists, but there's also systemic racism in education. There's also systemic racism in housing. So this is much bigger than the focus right now has been on criminal justice, because that is where we find ourselves after the horrific death of George Floyd. And there are things that need to be done immediately, and it has brought the attention to criminal justice. However, there are other places where criminal justice needs to, or where racism, systemic racism needs to be addressed. And when we address it from the state level, we can't just turn around and give unfunded mandates without funding them. And if we fund them one year, we have to continue to understand those priorities down the road and continue to fund them. So there is an public education piece, but there's also a training piece. And then there are other issues with education, with housing that also need to be addressed. So that's the role that needs to be played. And it's more than just giving lip service to criminal justice reform. There's a lot of moving parts, and it has to be backed up, not only right now during a crisis situation. And there's also systemic racism in our healthcare system, which is perfectly evident by the unequal numbers of people of color who are affected by COVID-19. So there is that too, but we need to address it not only in crisis situations, but over time and for the long haul. And once it's in place, once we help out, we have to continue to help out over time. It can't be lost.
Something that, having followed this story over the years, the developments with the Harriet Tubman Park, something that's always, it sticks out to me, and I think it sticks out to a lot of people, is that the state, they've been helpful in some regards, but they haven't really taken a major role in the development of the park. And obviously it's a partnership park. The federal government isn't putting up 100% of the funds. It's a 50% commitment, and then other resources have to come in for that. So if you're elected, in what ways will you advocate for more state resources to help the park come along? The
Harriet Tubman National Park on South.
That's right.
Now
right.
the Equal Rights Heritage Center.
Correct.
The national park has been slowed at the national park, at the national level is where the slowing of this park is. There's also a complicated issue because that property is owned by the AME Zion Church. So it makes it a little bit more difficult than just than other parks that are completely, I guess, owned, but by the Park Service. So there are issues that need to be worked out that way that slow this particular park. I think that the state funding for the Equal Rights Heritage Center is part of what is their input into the legacy of Harriet Tubman, and it is to augment what is happening down the street, down South Street, and to make the connection back, of course, to the city of Auburn and to the Seward House and to the other places where Harriet Tubman have lived. Harriet Tubman is such a treasure in Auburn, New York. However, we haven't honored her in the way that we should. And so we as Auburnians also need to show more enthusiasm for the fact that Harriet Tubman chose to live here, and her final resting place is here in Cayuga County in the 126. Any light we can bring to the memory of this wonderful woman and just everything that she did will only continue to help her light shine here in town. So there are complications. There are complications with the speed at which the national park has come. And I do think that the Equal Rights Heritage Center is the answer to what is connecting us to that right now through the state as well, because it's a national park, it's not a state park, and because it's owned by the AME Zion Church. So we need to wait for those organizations to do what's best and work that way.
That's a good segue to, obviously the tourism industry has been hard hit by COVID-19. There have been some businesses that have been able to open on a limited scale, but if people aren't traveling, and we've seen the statistics on that travel is down this year, then it obviously has a major impact on tourism. And right here in Cayuga County, tourism's a big industry for us. Do you think that looking ahead to 2021, obviously, if you're elected, that's when you'll start serving. Do you think that the state needs to help in some additional ways? Obviously, they've made tourism a priority, but do you think that there needs to be some help there to ensure that these tourism-related businesses stay afloat?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Tourism is a very large part of our budget in this district. Right now, one of the areas that seems to be booming, I watched on Spectrum News just yesterday that a marina had the best 4th of July weekend that they've ever had, because what better way to socially distance is than to get on a boat and be on a lake. So there are opportunities there, perhaps. So that kind of recreation might be an alternative to bringing people to the 126. Certainly, we have 4 Finger Lakes in the 126, and we have the Kettle Lakes of Onondaga County and of Portland County that are all part of this area that helps us to boom in the summertime. Yes, our museums are suffering. The arts as an economic driver is huge. So not having our museums open, people not being able to go into the Tiffany Chapel, into the Willard Chapel right now, those are issues. They are suffering. People are unemployed, so their donations are not going up, the donations of those sites. So there are issues. And so, yeah, the nonprofit tourism and for-profit tourism fields or world need to be helped. So many of them are small businesses. Some of them are farmers, right? Our vineyards and our wineries. They're suffering loss on multiple fronts, business loss and issues that are affecting farmers right now as a result of the lockdown. So yeah, we don't want to forget that our tourism sector is a huge part of the business sector, and it's a huge economic driver, especially for the Finger Lakes, especially for Central New York. And yes, there is a role that the state plays when finding funding for small businesses that include those tourism sites. So small businesses are not necessarily only retail stores or restaurants, but our small nonprofit businesses, our tourism businesses. There's a huge role that the state can play, but it is limited until they get funding, until we get our funding, until we get our tax dollars back from the federal government to give us a leg up under these crisis situations.
Let's close with this. Looking at the rest of the summer, what does the campaign look like? Do you think that you'll be able to have some? I think you alluded to this early on. Some events, obviously with limited gatherings, but I guess what does the campaign look like for you between now and Labor Day?
Well, there's no door knocking. We don't think there's going to be door knocking. I don't want to carry the virus with me to doors. And I'm certainly don't want volunteers to knock on doors of homes that might have sickness inside. So we need to be really careful. So that changes things quite a bit. Like I said earlier, I'm hopeful that there can be some social distancing events. Right now, while the weather is warm, we can be outside, we can stand far apart. We don't have to worry about being inside a restaurant or inside a bar to have a meet and greet, or go into people's homes. Very often people on the campaign trail, people who support you will invite you in, and then they'll invite their neighbors over to meet you. And that's a very big part of campaigning. Instead of it happening in the living room, it might happen in the backyard. So, and certainly Zoom conversations like this, I'm getting better and better at it. At first it felt a little wonky, but right now it's getting to be very normal. My campaign committee, we meet once a week and we meet on a Zoom call, and we're getting very used to waiting for each other to talk and delays in social media. So we're getting better at that. So it still looks, it looks different, but we're going to base some of our events on other events. I had the privilege of not having to have a primary. So I've been able to observe what events have been effective for some of my colleagues out there on the campaign trail, what they have used. After September 1st, we'll probably do a lot of phone calling, worry about calling people rather than knocking on doors. We will be back in the house come September. I'm sure it will get a little colder to have events outside, and it'll get darker earlier, so you don't have as much time to be outside and hold those events. I don't think a lot of people, there's some baseball games I hear that are happening, but they're only limiting it to 2 visitors to watch those baseball games. But there might be some things like that, some public events that outdoor markets are happening. So there might be some outdoor music and things like that. So I look forward to that, and talking a lot on Zoom. Moving forward that way.
Yeah, it's Zoom's become a popular platform during this pandemic, and it's something that I know we at the Citizen we've used this quite a lot. So and it's allowed us to have these conversations with candidates like yourself. So
well, and thank goodness we have it. So I'm a math professor at Hugo Community College, but I also teach computer science, and we track trends in technology. And so that students will know what the future jobs are, where technology is going. And I say to them, there are trends and then there are events. And it's an event that is going to change how we use technology. I think we'll all be using Zoom after the health crisis is over. I think we'll get used to it, and it'll be a tool that we use as a result of this event. So technology moves forward in trends, but also is affected when there is an event. So Zoom will be something that's in our future for a long time, I think, or this type of communications.
For sure, for sure. Well, we'll wrap it up there. Dia Carabajal, Democratic candidate for state assembly in the 126th district. It includes parts of Cayuga, Shenango, Cortland, and Onondaga counties. She'll be on the ballot November 3rd is the general election this year, I believe.
November 3rd, yes.
Yeah, so already memorizing that date in my head after memorizing.
Me too, believe me.
February date. So yeah, thanks so much for your time, Dia, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon on Facebook Live.
As always, thank you. Bye. Have a great day.